All right, everyone, welcome back to Talkin Soccer. I am Justin Horniker, your host, and today we're going to talk some NWSL. We'll walk through the U.S. Women's National Team announced rosters a little bit for the upcoming Europe trip with England and Netherlands on the mind at the end of the month. And then we'll talk NWSL Final. By the time you are listening, watching this, I'll be in KC for the final, for Media Day, so very amped about that. And we have a lot to talk about as far as the semifinals go and as far as what the outlook for the final is in KC, Orlando versus the Spirit. One that, on the looks of it is maybe a bit straightforward with how Orlando have played all year, with how Orlando have beaten the Spirit twice already this year and look to be, not to say unstoppable, but it's going to take a special effort to beat them, especially since the Spirit are still missing. If this was a Spirit with Croy Bethune, I think it would be a much different conversation, or at least a much more balanced conversation, but that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's talk through the semifinals a little bit first. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the podcast. If you're listening, please subscribe on whatever podcast app you're listening to. You can also find my coverage of the finals this weekend on the Talkin Soccer Substack. So if you're coming from the Substack, because I do post these for paid members, paid stuff. I don't do good about paywalls. I don't put a lot of my coverage behind the paywall, but one of the perks for being a paid member is you get the podcast a little bit early and you get to rest in the knowledge that you're supporting me and my journalism. So thank you all so much. I am just forever grateful for this past month. It's been really good for me. Not to get overly personal. All right, let's get into it. The semifinal, we had Orlando and KC, and we had Spirit and Gotham. And let's talk about Washington and Gotham first. That was the first match of the weekend. It was at Audi Field. 19,365 fans, a sellout. It was a fantastic environment, a great day for some soccer, and a match that took some PKs, went to extra time, saw a red card in extra time, need a little bit more. So let's talk through it a bit. It was definitely a bit of a chess match. Of course, you have Gotham under Juan Carlos Amorós, you have DC under Jonathan Heraldez, and it was a match that definitely felt like two Spanish managers, feeling each other out, right? Similar style of plays, good mix of proven stars and young players, especially in terms of DC. DC, I think, are interesting because a lot of their best players are young players coming up. If you think of, we'll talk about some of the contributors here, but not just Croy Bethune, as we mentioned earlier, that's been injured. She wins Rookie of the Year pretty unanimously. That was one that I definitely think with how well she played earlier this season, she would have just set an assist record that we've never seen before if she played the whole season. So that, I think her numbers were so fantastic through that first half of the season before her injury that even with the games missed, I think is a no-brainer. Of course, Ali Senor, Claire Hutton, both would have been, I don't think they necessarily did enough to bridge that gap, but Claire Hutton, as an 18-year-old, as a defensive central midfielder in a position that usually benefits veteran play, that usually benefits experience, I think is so impressive that even though, not everyone needs to win an award to get the recognition. So Claire Hutton, I think, is someone that, even though she doesn't win Rookie of the Year, she's still only 18 years old. So the sky's the limit for a player like that to contribute the way that she did, to be second best central midfielder in the league behind Taylor Flint, most likely, if you look at the disruption numbers anyway. Not as much in distribution yet, but definitely in the disruption numbers and the ability to lock down the midfield. I think it's hard to visualize how a player with that much inexperience was able to do that in the best, if not one of the best leagues in the world this year. So to go back onto that point, Hal Hirschfeld has also played a big role in this. She's another defensive midfielder, rookie defensive midfielder that is probably a little bit better on the ball, but she's also 23 versus 18. Okay, let's talk about the game. We don't have to dissect who's better between Hal Hirschfeld and Claire Hutton in this moment right now. But it reached halftime scoreless, no surprises there. Both teams kind of feeling each other out. DC had the better of the chances because Anke Trimberger was just, she wins goalkeeper of the year because her numbers this year, her shot stopping numbers this year were an anomaly. She stopped 8.1 post shot expected goals, and the next closest was 6.8. Aubrey Kingsbury, DC's keeper, was also one of the best in the league this year, but even then, a whole goal above expected saved for Anke Trimberger. Her numbers were incredible this season. So in this game, she kept Gotham in it. She kept the Spirit off the board for that first half. Second half, slightly more cagey. You kind of know that's coming. The next goal probably wins. And Gotham struck first. It was a stare. Very reminiscent to her goal in the final last year, where it's a header that she rises up, kind of fading away, puts it in the corner past Kingsbury. And at that moment, eerily similar. Visions of the final last year in New Jersey. And you're thinking, all right, well, I guess it's Gotham's game to lose. They bring in Lynn Williams in the 70th minute. That's always like such a flex. You can bring in NWSL's all-time goal scorer in the 70th minute to run at a tired defense. But it was not to be, because even though Gotham kept the Spirit to some low XG chances, Rose Kawasi, Lucy Santos were just pinging the ball through the midfield. There's a real fun sequence of play where Santos and Kawasi are kind of juggling the ball back and forth. Santos actually juggles the ball in place for a few strides before moving down the line a little bit more, and it doesn't end in a goal, but you see those little flares, those little skill moments, and you're like, all right, this game, these players are dialed in. And the tension was there. You had Trinity Rodman and Emily Sonnet going at each other. There's a lot. This felt like a rivalry match. This felt like two really good games playing with the shot for the final on the line. I think what you saw in both these games, especially with Gotham and DC, there is a regional rivalry there that Jason Anderson had a great piece before the game about how for a long time the NWSL has tried to make the New York, New Jersey, DC rivalry, feel important, and it never quite got there. But now, with how good Gotham are, with how good the Spirit are, with these high-profile games, this game definitely felt like a rivalry game. And with that crowd in DC too, crowd makes a big difference. And I think a lot of times when we talk about forcing a rivalry, the crowd has to be there to sell the environment as well. That's why Orlando and KC has felt like such a rivalry this year. We'll get to that in a moment here too. Of course, Rodman was much more important in this game in drawing Gotham's attention versus what she was able to do as far as contributing. And that's a big part of it too. Rodman, I think, is underappreciated for the way that she works on the defensive side of the ball, and then in how hard she works in the attack. She draws defenders out of position, and that was a big reason that DC were able to win the free kick. It's 3 feet to the right of the box. It's perfect crossing distance. It's a good angle to get a ball into the box and then put it on frame in stoppage time. So Gotham are up 1-1. You're in stoppage time. DC have a chance to send the ball into the box, and they're engaged. They're fighting for this equalizer. So Jenna Neiswanger picks up that yellow for that foul. McKenna Morris standing over it, and the ball that she delivers in is just absolutely perfect. Hal Hirschfeld gets up, heads it, finally beats Berger, and at that point, you go into extra time. Extra time was a lot more of the same, this cagey affair, and then you get the red card for Bruinha when she comes in, and she came in, and I think that was kind of the difference, just because Bruinha is much more of a attack-minded fullback versus a defensive-minded fullback, and sometimes that aggression we've seen before can come back to bite her. So she gets double yellows in this game. Trinity Rodman waves at her on the way out. It's pretty incredible. So then it goes to corners, then it goes to penalty kicks, and then in PKs, Aubrey Kingsbury saves all 3 of Gotham's PKs, and the Spirit make all 3 of theirs. So it's end of game, a bit anticlimactic with the way that the PK ran out. But for Aubrey Kingsbury to save all 3 PKs, they weren't terrible PKs either. So It was just a goalkeeper willing the team into the final. So Kingsbury said, the second that you start thinking that you've won or lost, then you're not able to give your best. So it's just taking it one at a time, not letting your emotions get too high or too low, and just staying really calm. They're riding this wave of emotion. Like I said earlier, the loss of LaCroix Bethune, the loss of Ole Asar, who was their striker for most of the year. Ashley Hatch has kind of found her form again, but it was Sar that, for the most part, was making those starts, and Hatch playing kind of underneath her or coming off of the bench. And Rodman, finding her game. Lacey Santos, earlier in the year, coming in from Spain, was coming off the bench, and there's a question of if her fitness was going to be there for the playoff run. She starts this match. She goes deep into this match. And Jonathan Giraldo said of his squad, maybe nobody thought that the first season with the changes, and Giraldo's came in late. Also remember that we, with the rookies, with the injuries, I think we are here because we deserve it. Nobody gave us anything. And I think that's definitely an aspect of the Spirit season, where the Spirit, of course, we know, have the talent. They won a championship recently, 3 years ago. Trinity Rodman, we all know that she's a star. We all know that Aubrey Kingsbury is a star. But last year was a rough year, and they parted ways with Ashley Sanchez. That trade in the offseason, they retooled a bit. They brought in Croix Bethune, drafted Croix Bethune, I should say, and just like their rookies, their draft class this year were incredible in building this team style. It's a completely different style of play than what we're used to out of them as well this season. And for them to be here in the final now as the number 2 team, they didn't surprise anyone. They held on to that number 2 seed even after Croix Bethune was injured. I think I'm on record as saying that they were going to fall like a lead balloon, and I am very wrong about that. And I'll acknowledge that here, but even without Croix Bethune, they've been fantastic. So you look ahead to next season, even if they don't win this final on Saturday, the Spirit had nowhere to go. Well, they do have places to go, but I think, they'll come back even stronger next year. That's the interesting thing about these Final Four. Even though all 4 of these teams are strong, there isn't necessarily a feeling that they're going to drop off. Gotham are maybe the ones out of the group that have some more of those, aging stars, but they're still in the prime of their careers, even if they're on the tail end of that prime. You maybe look at Anka Trimberger as, does she have this same level of anomaly season? But even if she doesn't, if she falls back down to earth a little bit, Gotham, we're still one of the stingiest defenses in the league. So that's what made Berger's goalkeeping so incredible, is that not only did she save a lot of goals that you would expect to go in, but she didn't have a lot of opportunities to do so either. Whereas sometimes you look at those numbers of a team, a good goalkeeper on a bad team, Alyssa Nair on Chicago comes to mind, and Mandy Hall also comes to mind in Utah. And, you see that they have a lot of chances to make those saves, a lot of chances to make an impact. But for Anka Trimberger, Gotham don't allow a lot of chances, and she was still able to have that impact. Same for Almu Schultz in Kansas City, Anna Morehouse to an extent as well. There's just a lot of good goalkeepers in this league, and you have to be so far above all these fantastic goalkeepers is just such an anomaly. So moving on. All right, Washington DC, they had their ticket. They're going to the final. Then Orlando hosts Kansas City. Kansas City playing with an opportunity to win and go home and be the away team in a home final. Orlando, the best team in the league, the NWSL Shield winners, and they have a chance to go to their first final. Fueled by Marta, we don't know how much longer Marta has left, and you'll see from this game that, we really don't know how much longer she has left, because she could keep playing another 5 years. Maybe she retired from the international game a little bit too early. I don't know, but she's fantastic. She looked fantastic again. You would not guess that she is where she is in her career as far as, late into that game. She's still running on the ball. She's still being a chaos agent. And the Pride have had the Currents number this year. They beat the Current 2-1 at CPKC to give them their first blemish at home this season. And Orlando gets the win at CPKC, so that's something to pay attention to this weekend, too. They have a win there where the Spirit weren't necessarily able to. A lot of history there for those two teams. And, Seb Hines and what he's been able to do in Orlando, what they've been able to build in Orlando this year. I called their offseason, sneakily the best offseason in the league, even though Gotham got all the flash. And of course, with the players that Gotham brought in, you're going to say that Gotham had the better offseason. But I think with how Orlando has built this team, they've done so purposefully, where every player they're bringing in, how they're going to fit in, what they're going for. Whereas some teams, aim to bring in the best players and figure it out later. To have such a targeted acquisition plan, to have such a targeted roster build is clearly why Orlando were able to be in the place that they're in this year. Because it's not necessarily, of course, you have your Barbara Bandas, your Anna Morehouses, your Emily Sams, but they don't necessarily have the sheer number of superstars that, say, a Gotham do, if we're comparing Orlando and Gotham, right? And I think Seb Hines has just proven that he's coach of the year this year for a reason. All right, so let's get to the game, because the game wasn't as straightforward, right? And these two teams have battled. They battled to a scoreless draw at Inter Co Stadium a month and a half ago, and now here with a chance on the final on the line, and the current strike first through Dabinia, and it's a player that KC feel like they need to get going. They feel like they need production out of someone not named Temochwinga. They get it from Dabinia, and she scores the first goal, and you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, now Kansas City haven't allowed more than one goal in their last 10 games. They're, have only allowed 5 goals against in the last 10 games, but Orlando, much different here. They were very motivated to get back, and even though Dabinia's goal was born out of the chaos of KC's attack and their transition moments, it only took 8 minutes for Orlando to find their equalizer. Ali Watt connected with Haley McCutcheon, taking advantage of the current rough day in their one-on-one defensive battles. Kayla Sharples, I've talked a lot in my articles recently about what her, Alana Cook, and Alma Schultz have done in just rebuilding that back line kind of on the fly. When Flacco came in, and with that roster the way it was, the roster had a lot of star power, but it wasn't necessarily well constructed. And you see that especially with their center backs when Elizabeth Ball went down, when Gabby Robinson went down. There just wasn't a lot of depth there. So they bring in Alana Cook, they bring in Kayla Sharples, Alma Schultz at keeper to replace A.D. French, and that was the difference over the last second half of the season. I think if they don't make those moves, KC fall, they might even fall down to 5th with just defensively. They were allowing a lot of chances against, and their chances going forward did run dry. They weren't quite at the pace that they were at the start of the season. Now, they may have still had a very similar record, but come playoff time when these games tighten up and you need that defensive backbone, Flacco talked about it after their win over North Carolina, that 5-4 game in the opener against Portland was a nightmare for him, as much as it was entertaining as a neutral, entertaining for me being in attendance and covering that game. But as for Flacco, someone who really prides himself on defensive structure, prides his teams on being able to take fun out of the games, I think is the meme for Flacco. It's just that he can really make a game miserable so that his team can win. To have that kind of really a 9-goal game is a nightmare for him. And he kind of talked about that. So, rebuilding that defensive backbone on the fly this winter when they have more opportunities to make those moves to, build a roster for Flacco's vision. I think that's the thing to remember too, is that when they were, making those moves in the past, they didn't really have a manager in mind to go through Casey's manager situation for a little bit. Hugh Williams, first year, was not a good fit. He's named in the Sally Yates report. They part ways with them. They bring in Matt Potter. Matt Potter, former U.S. Youth National Team coach, a really good NCAA coach, and definitely had his moments and was able to bring KC to the final in their second year. And it was very much a surprise final, but I think it's one of those things where they overplayed their potential a little bit, and then year 2 comes crashing down a little bit. They have injuries. They get on the end of some bad luck, and Potter is fired, probably prematurely. Caroline Hillblom comes in as an intern, does fine, but ultimately moves on. And then Vlatko Andonovski is freed up because the U.S. drop out of the World Cup the way they did. And the rest is, as they say, history. So now with an opportunity to, more thoroughly build up the roster and more thoroughly, or I guess purposefully, right? That's what we talked about with Orlando. It's that purposeful building that is what separates. And in a league like Kansas City, or in a league like NWSL, where there's so much parity from top to bottom, where, as you saw this year, the top four did separate a little bit, but that's not to say that next year that will be the case. And I think you see with North Carolina, they're building something there. You see with Angel City and San Diego should have the talent. San Diego's a mess, but should have the talent to get there. Angel City, I think things had to change there, but they should also have the talent, especially if Alyssa Thompson keeps making the strides that she's making. Giselle Thompson looks like she's going to be an incredible player as well. A lot of good young players that can take that next step, that maybe they don't necessarily have to build the best roster, but to have those young players just be able to step forward and a coach there that helps them step forward. Portland aren't going to be where they were this year. They're just not, especially if Sophia Smith is healthy. Chicago will probably be better. BFC have a good, solid defensive backbone there, and I think if they can figure out their midfield a little bit more, that's a team that is going to surprise people next year. I really like what BFC is doing. And Albertin Montoya, I think, is a good coach as well. So it's just that purposeful roster building. So when Orlando were able to tie the game up there at the end of the half, we got back to it, folks. We got back to it. And we really showed that maybe they were riding that defensive pair a little bit too much, because Kayla Sharples was beaten 1v1 defending a few times in this game. The second goal in the second half comes from, again, one of those defensive lapses where Barbara Banda receives the ball, Sharples is at her back, and she just makes her guess completely wrong. Banda turns, free in on goal, takes the shot, destroys the net camera, and it's 2-1. And then, for the third goal, Banda again, she picks the pocket of Kayla Sharples. So KC are pushing up. Sharples has the ball at about the halfways. KC are trying to build through possession, and they're trying to recycle. They're trying to push forward. Banda's able to pressure. She knocks the ball out for Marta, who just runs right onto it, like just a flash of speed. And to say Marta's goal was incredible is underselling it, because Marta runs onto it. She has Sharples. She takes Sharples for a ride the whole way. She cuts right. She fakes the shot. Both Cook and Sharples go down simultaneously. It's very satisfying. If you haven't seen this goal yet, go look it up. It's very satisfying. And then dribbles around almost Schultz and has a relatively easy finish, but the way to get there, and Haley Mace is charging late, and she makes her miss also. It's just like, you can't really blame the individual defensive efforts, because once Marta's running, downhill, essentially, you're playing catch up in that moment. And while if Cook doesn't go down there, you're always expecting Marta to shoot, though. So you have to take into account that it is the player that it is, one of the all-time greats in the sport, fighting for her first NWSL title. Because Marta, has not won a title since she was with the Western New York Flash, and in a league that no longer exists. So for Marta to get to the final here, not to ruin the rest of this recap, but for Marta to make it to the final here, it's going to be an incredible story to talk about. So KC don't take it lying down. It goes into stoppage time. There's a lot of stoppage time here because there's just a lot of things that went on in this game, and KC were able to win a penalty. Vanessa DiBernardo really strikes it hard, strikes it well, 3-2, and then in the final moments, they're able to again keep possession in the box. Anna Morehouse comes out to play a ball, and it just goes wrong, and all of a sudden KC are in possession. A lot of players in the box, but sent in for Kayla Sharples. She's able to, it's kind of an awkward angle. She's not able to get up like she wants, and then just ball is just skied over the empty net. And it was just that perfect moment to address, to, really put to bed these defensive lapses that you made earlier in the game. You could have redeemed yourself, and it was just a hard moment. And, you feel for players when they have games like this, because it's everything that could possibly go wrong does, and either you're already in your head or afterwards you're going to get in your head. And it's one of those things where you have to have a short memory. It's a rough way to end the season, but Kayla Sharples came in, didn't have a training camp, was just slotted in, and was able to do a good job all season. So it's a rough day for her. It sucks for her, but it was a good game in general. Orlando win in the end. They're going to KC. That's Orlando and KC do not like each other at this point. There's been a lot going on in those games, and for Orlando to now have an opportunity to win the final in KC's home without KC there, I think is going to fuel the narratives, going to feed families, as they say. Vlatko, talking after the game, said, "First thing I told them is that I'm very proud of them for everything they have done this season. We lost this game, but we can't let that define everything we accomplished." And then he ended saying, "I make this promise, we're going to come back stronger." And I think for Vlatko, it's hard to, I think we think of Vlatko, we think of what this team was with Temwa Chwinga, with all the players that they brought in over the course of the season. And you forget how bad the season went last year, how just not to plan the season went last year, especially after they made the final the year before. So for Vlatko to take over that team that was kind of in disarray, build them in the way that he did. And for Vlatko too, Vlatko was at a low. He made a joke before the match. So match day -1, there is some talk about, what exactly was it that, brought you to KC, that you said when you sat down with the Longs to talk about the idea of you coming back to KC and coaching the team. And he said, we are both in places we don't want to be right now in terms of Vlatko being at the low where he was with the national team, and then for KC with how their season ended. So great story for both of them. And for Vlatko, it's kind of not a redemption, because, for him, someone who has won NWSL titles before, I think you could tell that not where he wants to be, but the building blocks are there. And a lot of great young players, like we talked about Claire Hutton before. You have just another rookie in Ellie Wheeler, who doesn't get a lot of the shine just because of the players around her. But Ellie Wheeler last year was a college player, comes in as a rookie, and kind of takes over the job and starts most games. And just a lot of good young pieces there, as much as you have like Des Scott retiring and Lola Bonta getting to, like I said, the end of that prime. But for a player like Lo, I think Lo has a similar, not to say that Lo is Marta, but I think Lo has a similar kind of disposition to Marta, where, we're finding out now that players can just play it until they're done and still be effective. So I think that aging curve sometimes, especially in athletes at this level, isn't as aggressive as it once was. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. And then goalkeeping wise, Alma Schultz, in her 10-game span, had a better goals saved above expected than Ankershin Berger. So it's a short time span. There's some anomalies that happen when you only have 10 games, but something to keep an eye on, especially after how the goalkeeping has gone for KC over the past years. But to shift attention to the team moving on, Orlando moves on. Seb Hines, his pride, come from behind to win against KC. And he said after the game, we matched Kansas's intensity, called them Kansas, which is funny. Both teams wanted to win so badly. It's understandable. It was going to get a bit physical. There were also some calls that I did not agree with, but I won't go into that. We managed their intensity very well, and we outmatched it. Barbara Banda talked about just the intensity of the match. You kind of saw it with the players. They won, both teams, they wanted to win, and there was some animosity with how things went down in Kansas City and how things went down in Orlando previously. Barbara said the determination of the team, being hardworking, and the relationship that we have as a team has really taken us through all of this. And it is a little bit of a coming together. I think you see that just with how the Brazil national team played in Marta's last hurrah. You have that a little bit with this Orlando team too, of coming together, a team that's very strong. You saw that in the games that Marta missed this year, where she's celebrating just as much up in the box as the team is down the pitch. So there's definitely a togetherness there. So the big stat: Marta, born in 1986, Hal Hirschfeld, born in 2001, were the difference makers in these semifinals. And the dichotomy there. Marta turned pro with Vasco da Gama in 2000, a year before Hal Hirschfeld was born. So that's kind of the incredible longevity in a sport that only gets more technical as the year goes by as well. Like the sport in 2000 of women's soccer is much different than the sport in 2024 in terms of just like the technical ability, the players coming through, the athletic ability. Every sport gets more technical and more athletic as the years go on. And for women's soccer, I think it's almost more so just because the investment in youth soccer and the investment in pro facilities has only gotten better over the last 24 years. And for Marta to still be at the top of the game with all those things, not to say going against her, but with all those things that would, push some players out of the league a little bit early, and Marta has still stayed on top of the game. So yeah, her first U.S. domestic title opportunity since Western New York Flash's WPS win in 2011. The precursor to the NWSL, of course. So going into the final, DC and Orlando. Orlando has DC's number as well so far this year, but it's a final. It's a final. It's a neutral venue. We don't know how that's going to go. We don't know how that's going to look, and anything can happen. I think just like you saw in the Gotham match, you'll probably see a bit of a chess match, but there is a difference here because with these semifinals, you had Washington and Gotham who played more similar styles. You have KC and Orlando who play more similar styles. And now you have that styles clash coming together, that AJ styles clash coming together. And it makes for an interesting game. And it comes down to, just like I talked about a few weeks ago with KC and North Carolina, it comes down to who can best execute. Who can execute their style, who can dictate the flow of the game. There will be ebbs and flows in that. You have two very, very good coaches as well. And I'm very excited for Media Day tomorrow, or in 2 days, just to hear from everyone, just to talk to the coaches, to hear about what their mentality is approaching this game. And training is a little bit disjointed too. You got to travel to KC from the East Coast, and anyone's game. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. NWSL also announced their best 11 this week. We talked about Annika Trimberger. We talked about Coach of the Year, Seb Hines. Defenders, Emily Sams of Orlando, Casey Kruger of DC. So two of the finalists here this weekend. Kaylee Kurtz of North Carolina. Kaylee Kurtz was fantastic this year. I think that center back core in Carolina is one for the future as well, and one that maybe is overlooked like a lot of things with North Carolina. And then Jenna Neiswanger, of course, with Gotham and her fantastic year that she's had. Midfielders and forwards. And this is where the NWSL awards get a little bit interesting because they have midfielders and forwards. So you can pick 6 midfielders and forwards. It's a little bit different than, for instance, my MLS voting. I don't vote on NWSL awards, but I do get a vote in MLS. And we get to choose a formation, and that kind of locks you into the forwards and midfielder slots, and you have to kind of think of it as a formation with left-sided, right-sided, center mids, and everything. But that being said, the top 6 aren't necessarily surprising. Temwa Chawinga, Barbara Banta, Marta, Coy Bethune, Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith. Those are your 6 midfielders and forwards. But like the interesting thing is you essentially have like 6 attacking forwards. Trinity Rodman as a winger. Sophia Smith can be a winger. Temwa Chawinga is sometimes a winger, but more of like an inside forward more often than not. So you don't necessarily have like this formation is all over the place. There's no midfield. There's no center mids. No defensive mids. No love for the defensive mids. And then we saw second team. You have goalkeeper Anna Morehouse. So Morehouse gets second team. Annika Trimberger gets first team. Maybe some Mandy Hot erasure there. But it is what it is. Defenders, Naomi Girma, second team. And I think Naomi Girma, I think that is almost more impressive with how San Diego's season was. Of course, that doesn't... I still think Naomi Girma is the best defender in the league. But Terry McCown, Gary Abello from Orlando. So both Orlando's defenders are getting on this list. And then Ryan Williams from North Carolina. So I talked about that North Carolina duo of Kaylee Kurtz and Ryan Williams. They're both in the best teams. Midfielders and forwards of the second team, you have Vanessa DiMarnato and Lola Bonta, so you do have a little bit of a functional midfield there. Hal Hirschfeld, so that could be a 3-person midfield. Esther, Rose Lavelle, and Yasmin Ryan. So you get a little bit of unbalanced in that group as well. But pretty good. I don't really have a lot of complaints with the best 11. I think with these things, most of the time it comes down to like fine margins anyway. And a lot of times team success gets wrapped into individual success. So that's what makes Naomi Girma's second team inclusion so incredible. And, maybe it tells you a little bit about the USWNT roster selections as well. So we'll go there next with kind of where the USWNT roster is. So speaking of Naomi Girma, Emma Hayes names her roster for the upcoming friendlies, the Europe leg of things next at the end of the month. So in 10 days is the match, or 12 days is the match with England. By the time you're hearing this, it'll be 10 days, maybe 9. We'll see. So Emma Hayes named her roster. There are some interesting exclusions. I think it's important to understand that this is a series of matches in England. It's at the end of the NWSL season, so there are some players left off for the sake of they've played a lot of minutes this year, and it's a non-competitive friendly window. And even though you're playing England and the Netherlands, they're friendlies, right? So it gives you an opportunity to try some things for Emma Hayes that hasn't had a ton of opportunities to just be flexible. She's been thrown into the fire pretty early and hasn't gotten a lot of like competitive games. So what England and the Netherlands allow you to do is play teams that have ambition, that are competitive, but also allows you to play around, to be flexible, to mess with the player pool a little bit, to understand what you have without having the competitive need to win, right? So you can play a little bit more of an inexperienced roster to give them that experience in these matches. So for the European Tour, the roster is as followed. Mandy Hott, Fallon Torres-Joyce, which I think that this one is interesting. Fallon Torres-Joyce, for those of you that don't know, she played in Seattle, or OL Reign previously, was transferred to Manchester United, was originally playing as the backup. This year, she's in the position to be the starting keeper. And in the past, like her shot stopping ability has always been great, but it's her ability to play the ball with her feet that has been the question. And, with a lot of young keepers, that is the big, like I watch a lot of NCAA women's soccer. The ability to play the ball with their feet, if you have a young keeper that can really distribute the ball, that is such an outlier. That is just the area of the game that takes the most, like that and positioning, or the areas of the game that take the most to really work on. You need a lot of game experience. You need experience playing with the ball, which in Seattle, I don't think she had a lot of opportunities at that time. So, okay, so Fallon Torres-Joyce, who has, looking at her opportunities in Manchester United, in Manchester, she's been much better with the ball at her feet this year, and she's been a very good shot stopper as well. So a good opportunity to get her in net. Now, the U.S. goalkeeping pool is just fantastic, so I don't know if that necessarily means she starts. Alyssa Nair is back as well, of course. But I think you maybe take this opportunity to mix things up a bit. I'm sure Alyssa Nair will still get one of the starts, but I think you probably see Hott and Nair with Torres-Joyce just kind of being there so Emma Hayes can get a look at her, but I wouldn't mind seeing what that looks like. Okay, defenders, you have Tierna Davidson, Emily Fox, so the Arsenal fullback, the former North Carolina Courage fullback, Ava Gaetano, who got her first cap in the last window. She plays for PSG. Naomi Girma, of course, Casey Kruger, Alyssa Mallinson of BFC. This is also her second call-up. Jenna Neiswanger, Emily Sams, her second camp, and Emily Sonnet, who has a lot of camps. Midfielders, of course, Corbin Albert, who seems to be a Emma Hayes player. Sam Coffey, Hal Hirschfeld, who could, I think, if I were ranking my top 5 rookies this season, Hal Hirschfeld's probably there. But a defensive mid, that's what makes this roster a little bit different. Because, okay, so you have Lindsay Horan, Rose Lavelle, and then Lily Johannes, who recently declared for the U.S. This is her second call-up, so she will be cap-tied or getting close to being cap-tied, but she's officially declared for the U.S. after taking her time to kind of see where she wanted to go. And I think it speaks to the Netherlands and to the US in a bit of a, I don't want to say a new approach, but maybe a more experienced approach where both feds were willing to sit back and let Johannes make her own decision, which I think is very good. I think it's healthy with where we are in our current state that we aren't, pressuring young players to pick one nation or another. Because as we know with dual nationals, it's hard because when you hear dual nationals talk about it, they often talk about not feeling like they necessarily belong to one nation or another. And if you pick a nation and things go south or you're not called up as much as you maybe thought of, maybe the nation told you that you're going to be called up a lot and you're not, and then you've declared and now you're cap tied, it can be a mess. But for Lily Johannes, her and like the generation coming up, this new generation of U.S. players are just so dynamic. I'm so excited for what the U.S. national team looks like in like 5 years. But to get back to my earlier point about how this roster being a little bit interesting is you only have two real defensive central midfielders. You have Sam Coffey and you have Hal Hirschfeld, both coming off of long seasons. And that's where the Claire Hutton talk comes up as well. I saw people in my mention saying that it was a little bit of a snub, but I think you have to remember that Hutton's 18. She played a very long season and started a lot and had a U23 or a U20. What was that? What was that age group? Well, she had a World Cup, a youth World Cup to go to as well. U21, I believe, right? Okay. I think it was U23 actually. I'm not gonna look that up. Comment below. So she's had a long season, a lot of traveling, and coming from a youth background. She was in the youth ranks before this. You're not used to playing this much soccer without breaks. So I think it's okay that Claire Hutton was not called for the international camp. I think that's fine. And she's well on the radar. Obviously, she's one of the better defensive center mids in the league this year as an 18-year-old. Emma Hayes is not overlooking her. It's okay that she's not in this camp. But there's a lot of youth in this camp, which I think is very exciting. And you'll notice here in the forwards, it's Yasmin Ryan, Emma Sears, Ali Setnor getting her first call up. Also part of that U23 team earlier. Jaden Shaw, Alyssa Thompson, and then the outlier of this group is Lynn Williams. But for the most part, you're seeing a lot of young players getting opportunities. Yasmin Ryan, this is her. She has 2 caps. Emma Sears has 2 caps. Ali Setnor, no caps. This is her first cap, her first senior team call-up. Jaden Shaw has a lot of caps, but remember, she's still young. She has just been that good of a player. Alyssa Thompson as well. And then Lynn Williams, who has a lot of caps, 73. I was thinking Rose Lavelle has 108 caps, which is a lot of caps. Emily Sonnet, Rose Lavelle, Lindsay Horan has 159 caps. So, you have your most experienced national team players that aren't retired or in Becky Sauerbrun's case, not saying they're retired, but not getting called up anymore. Interesting, huh? I'm worried. I'm worried about that one. And then you have, players making their first call up. And what you have is you're going to get to that England game. You're going to get to that Netherlands game where you're going to have players that aren't experienced with Emma Hayes and are going to have to play big minutes. And I think that's good. You're putting the deep end, sink or swim. Let's see what happens. And, even though you don't have Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, Mallory Swanson, that trio that was so successful for you at the Olympics, it gives Emma Hayes an opportunity to think outside the box, to explore the player pool a little bit more. And I think it's, there may be some overreactions if the results go south, but I'm urging people to have to zoom out a little bit and just know that you're getting young players and players without much international experience, and it's going to pay off in the build up for the next World Cup and the build up for the next Olympics. And you have some time to figure out the player pool a little bit. And now's the time. If you don't experiment now, and against high caliber opposition. She believes at the start of the year you have Japan again, Colombia, and Australia. So some quality opposition there in competitive matches. There will be a January camp as well. So there are more opportunities to get players in, to look at players, and there will be more competitive opportunities to then what you see at She Believes is hopefully what Emma Hayes has come up with from there. So we'll end it there. Thank you all so much for watching the podcast, for listening to the podcast again. I'm Justin Horniker. If you are not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Give me a little thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube. Subscribe if you're listening on your podcast player. If you're listening on Substack, thank you so much. And there'll be more this week. We have to talk U.S. men's national team. There are 2 games against Jamaica. I was there in St. Louis, here in St. Louis, talking about it, talking to it, reporting on it. That's the word I was looking for. And MLS playoffs coming back this weekend, hot and heavy. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more. But until then, we'll talk soon.